Hey gamers, so I'm a fan of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I thought that it would be fun with the new 2024 rules update. I just got my hands on the book for the new rules set, for the new player's handbook, and I thought it would be fun to go back and rewind to 10-ish years ago when I first started playing 5th edition and I made my very first character, and I thought, well, what would it look like to just remake that with the new rules? So 10-year later update, what's it look like? What's the differences? Maybe it'd be a fun way to explore the difference between these quote-unquote not addition changes. And, well, I just thought it'd be fun, so I hope you're along for that ride. So, starting off, this was my character, Zivelquixlal, or Zix for short. He was a forest gnome, charlatan, and a rogue, arcane trickster. So, we got a confluence of interests and playstyles. According to his backstory, he was basically a huge asshole who stole from his own village and, didn't get along with people because he was always pulling tricks. And, obviously, I've come a long way as a player since my very first edgelord. So, no judgment on Zix. We had an epic ending that involved betraying the party and leaving the campaign, basically. But that's maybe a story for another time. Focusing down on the character, how did I kind of come up to this conclusion of who this person would be? Other than, obviously being a roleplay, self-interested edgelord archetype, maybe. Okay. Well, as you can see, we got up to level 5 in the campaign. We actually played through the Lost Mines of Phandelver was the campaign. You can see I got the Boots of Striding and Springing. Spoilers, there's some magic items in that adventure, which I feel like was the perfect opportunity to because in the previous edition and the new edition, so one difference right off the bat is speed. The small races or species now, instead of having a 25-foot speed, they got 30 feet by default, so it's all good. But I feel like this one item was designed to be and yeah, for all those small guys in the party in this intro adventure, maybe you can be 30 feet walking now. And it's a great magic item. Side tangent. Okay, we got to go all the way back to the old book and how we would determine making our character, to go through how we made the old character before we can kind of compare that or compare along the way to making the new character. So starting off with our statistics, this was standard array as far as I can tell. We could have got this with point buy, which you can get standard array with point buy. That's how it works. If you don't know, so 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8 are your standard items. We've got our 8 in strength. We've got our 15 in dexterity. We've got our 14 in con. We've got our 12 in intelligence. And we have our wisdom in 10 and our charisma at 13. Modern me is ooh, an odd number. Because as you know, every even number applies the modifier. If I'm telling you this, you probably know. Also, this style of writing your big numbers in the big box and the small modifier numbers in the small box, I'm sure caused no such debates among people, but I eventually flipped this around, I think a lot of people ended up doing. But, we didn't know. We just thought this was the way. It just seemed like that was how it indicated to do it. So anyway, as you'll note that, though, those numbers I read out didn't quite match. Dexterity at 15 and intelligence at 12. That's because as a forest gnome in particular, we got a +1 to our dexterity and a +2 to our intelligence. And you can already see the way the book lays it out with your ability scores, and then race is the next thing that you pick in the book. So I, flipping through, I got to forest gnome, and then by the time I got to my class as the rogue, because ability scores were dictated by which species you chose, I was looking through the classes and I see, the synergy of the rogue with the arcane trickster in particular in terms of intelligence really fit with forest gnome, or gnomes in general, I guess, is the intelligence boost. So it was an interesting way to kind of the way the rules influenced who you might want to create that felt like a natural fit. It directed you in a certain way to, like, I guess, fulfill an archetype. And in this case, the archetype that this character was fulfilling was, I'm a mischievous little gnome, and I'm just like enjoy laughing at people getting tricked and fooled. If you're familiar with Phandelver, you know, there's a Zentarum representative, and they're like kind of like the shady faction, and this guy, he was all up into getting involved in that. So that's the direction he was going. He used the Zentarum to eventually, steal their treasure for their own means, and that's how he kind of got out of the campaign. I had a new character I wanted to play, and it was memorable. And I'm getting sidetracked again. So we figured out how we got our ability scores. At level 4, you get a ability score improvement or a feat. We played with the feat optional rules. Feats are now basically built into character creation, so it's no longer an optional system, but we liked the optional rule because it seemed like more fun. Obviously, everybody wanted to play with feats. So I took the lucky feat because that seemed like an appropriate thing to take for a gnome. And then otherwise, going through the build, you've got your sneak attack, you've got your cunning action, which lets you dash, disengage, dodge. I never really got to play level 5 for like more than like half a session as like the exit of the campaign, but uncanny dodge, pretty useful to react to take half damage, especially since, we didn't learn shield back then. The arcane trickster could only learn certain kinds of spells. Because at level 3, you choose your subclass archetype, and like I said, we chose the arcane trickster version of the rogue as opposed to the assassin or the thief. This one felt more thematically flavorful, coming from this like nature and illusionist magic, very forest gnome-y. I feel like the forest gnome really informed a lot of the direction because of the flavor that they put in the book, which naturally fit into exploring magic, and specifically because the arcane trickster could only take the certain kinds of illusion magic spells. So they had to be enchantment or illusion, and then every once in a while you would get a extra option outside of those that you could take from the wizard list. Now in the new rules, to choose whatever you want from the wizard list in terms of spells. So there's no more of this specific flavor direction, which is nice to have the freedom that it's more opened up. But obviously, getting rid of the tying your species traits to get your ability score changes, and now that's part of backgrounds instead. It just changes up the game and like the direction that the rules flow you through in terms of your creative thinking about the character. So that's an interesting change. Obviously, we're remaking this character for 2024, so a lot of that flavor is gonna hold through, specifically things like our background, like personality trait suggestions that we've gone through here. So has a joke for every occasion, especially when it's inappropriate. Like he cares more about making himself laugh than other people. And, chaotic, independent alignment, and the bond about fleecing the wrong person. I think that kind of inspired my thinking in terms of his backstory. And he says, I hate myself for it after, but I'll run to preserve my own hide if the going gets tough. And implementing this idea that he was kind of cowardly as his flaw. All of these things are now kind of stripped away in the new version, where we don't go through and have these personality suggestions as part of our backstories. The backstory is pretty taut, pretty tight, and it's just a basic flavor. So you're kind of left to build up a lot of these details yourself, and I feel like that's maybe a bit of a loss for the new version. Anyway. There's nothing stopping you from, as a DM, but it's not directed to you. Maybe in the DM's guide, I don't know, it's not out yet. They'll give you suggestions about how to give more personality. In the new sheet, they've got a section for your backstory and personality, but the book doesn't give you a huge amount of guidelines, or guidance, at least not in terms of like a rollable table or selectable table like the old backgrounds did, where there's a plethora of suggestions there that could really help take you in a certain direction and inspire your character's story. So speaking of spells, we've got Minor Illusion, Mage Hand, Message, Prestidigitation. We've got the Find Familiar, which was kind of like the one extra spell that you could take outside of the enchantment and illusion schools. So you see I've got Charm charm person, sleep, and silent image otherwise. And find familiar, I would summon the owl and use flyby to give myself advantage as a rogue. It seemed like the optimal play before I was reading how everybody did that. In the lore, it says that gnomes reach adulthood by around age 40 and then live like something like 300 years. Obviously, saying my character was 24, basically he was saying he's still kind of a kid and not very mature, and there's a good reason why he's kicked out, basically. So we've got proficiency in thieves tools, expertise actually, disguise kit, forgery kit. We've got some skills, dexterity, intelligence, saving throw, acrobatics, investigation, persuasion, sleight of hand, and stealth. All good roguey type things to have. So that's kind of where we're at. We get speak with small beasts. So from our gnome advantage, our species traits in the old version, advantage on all intelligence, wisdom, charisma saving throws against magic, natural illusionist, just getting to know the minor illusion cantrip, and then speak with small beasts. This has been replaced with a much more straightforward version, which is just you get the spell to speak with the small animals. There's no more ambiguity about, well, what does that mean, speak with small beasts? I feel like I barely use it or it never came up. And then this is another thing that's missing from backgrounds is the false identity, second ID, ability to forge documents, like these extra skills, the suggested, like, what's your favorite scam as a charlatan? These things helped flesh out, like, what else your background gave you in terms of not just your skills and maybe now like certain proficiencies and ability scores even, but also just some extra flavor juice to inject into your concept. So maybe that's something that is another homebrew idea to carry over or bring back. So now let's move on and take a look at what we would do to recreate this character in the new version and what maybe differences we'll find along the way. The D&D Beyond finally released a character sheet, but it's not form fillable, so shout out to Nath Handsome, not handsome.com, for creating this form fillable version, which I found on Reddit. If you want to support them, check it out. Big thanks. Serving once again, the D&D community comes through and makes something useful out of just disappointing. Like, come on, guys, I could print this off. Maybe there is another one and I didn't see it, but an easy Google search away, I only found sheets that were for sale physically, and it's like I can print my own. And also there's this now, so like bless Not Handsome for putting this together. So how do we start off with the new Player's Handbook book and creating your character? The book starts off with how to play the game, sort of, and then we get into creating your characters in chapter 2, and they lay this out a little bit differently. They want you to choose your class, determine your origin, which includes your species and your background, then determine your ability scores, which kind of makes sense in terms of the flow of certain things. But this new way of filling things out also changes the direction where it puts class ahead of who you are as like a person. So making class the iconic choice as opposed to starting with your species and your background. Like, it's more about what your career is going to embody first and foremost. Like, what's your main thing that you're going to do through the game is you're going to be your class. And then from there, think about your background in terms of where you grew up and, what kinds of backgrounds might synergize with your class choice, as well as which ability scores you want to bump up. I feel like a lot of character creation is a little bit of back and forth between things like what background and ability scores you're gonna roll up and the class, and it all kind of ties together, so we might just have to jump around a little bit. But you can see the design direction that's going to influence my thinking. If I was making this character new, I would have first chosen to be an arcane trickster rogue, because I would have thought, this seems cool because I'm a rogue, but I'm also tricky, and I've got wizard magic. It's like a little bit of, I can play kind of a wizard, but also kind of a rogue, and I might think that's really cool. And then I might go through the book, and maybe I would have picked a different race altogether and a different backstory, and I wouldn't have had these personality flaws that I kind of thought about how to role play into the character and turn him into a little jerk. So I don't know. For the best, they've changed it. We'll see. So let's say that we've chosen our class. First, we know that we're a rogue, and we know that we are an arcane trickster, and that we're going to start, let's just start at level 5, because we know that that's where we're going to get eventually, and we'll kind of just build it towards that. Nothing too drastic is going to change. We're just going to kind of go through the new abilities as they come up through building up the class, and just kind of talk back to compare them to what we used to have. So as a rogue in the new version, we know that we get light armor training, we get proficiency in thieves' tools, and for weapons we get simple weapons and martial weapons that have the finesse or light property. In the old version, they just listed out hand crossbows, longswords, rapiers, and short swords. Hand crossbows have the light property, rapiers had the finesse property, and short swords had both. Long swords, though, didn't, and therefore are excluded for the rogue in the new version. But I feel like basically everybody used the rapier and not the longsword anyway, but there you go. A slight difference. I think I like the simplified wording of it. Basically, it just tells you, hey, the things that you thought you should get for the martial side, you get those things. Here you go. But the rogue never listed the scimitar, which is a finesse and light weapon, and therefore is also now eligible to the rogue in terms of their weapon proficiencies. So a little bit of a buff, especially considering in the new book there's weapon masteries, which we'll get to. The rogue gets access to also. They get to choose 2. So scimitar and short swords seem like a great combination because of their weapon mastery properties, Nick and Vex. Nick means that you get to make the extra attack with another light weapon. So just like 2-weapon fighting, but for free instead of using your bonus action. And the second one could be a follow-up, which is Vex, which just means that you get advantage if you hit the creature on your next attack roll before the end of your next turn. So 2-weapon fighting and your bonus action is still free, and you guarantee advantage on your next attack to get sneak attack. It's like you've got it all built in. That's weapon mastery properties for you. So that's another big change. It's like a whole other system that adds extra depth to the rogue from the get-go. And again, mechanically might influence your decisions in terms of what you're going to want to take or what kind of style you want to play into. As a rogue, level 1, we also get 4 skill proficiencies to choose from. They're the same in both versions, and the new sheet organizes things by their tied ability modifier score as opposed to the old style, which was alphabetically, and they just told you what skill you were supposed to use for it. Now, I remember in 2014, it was kind of like a suggestion that you could use a different ability if it made sense, where I don't think that they say that anymore, or it's not. I haven't read it cover to cover, to be honest, but it seems like it's much more straightforwardly put out there that these are the skills because they're organized specifically in this way. I don't know. You let me know which way of displaying this that you preferred in the comments, because that's a great engagement question. It really highlights athletics as the lone strength skill. And I guess there's no such skill as Constitution, so there you go. While we're down here, Heroic Inspiration is the new version of Inspiration, so, this box is now this box. And let's see, we were filling out, so our 4 abilities would have been Acrobatics, Investigation, Intimidation, Persuasion, and that's 4 things. Sleight of Hand and Stealth are left on my old sheet, so maybe, let's see, this is where the jumping around starts, where you're like, wait, well, what does my background give me then? Because that'll fill out the next 2 positions. In the old version, Charlatan gave you Deception and Sleight of Hand proficiency, and the new version also gives you Deception and Sleight of Hand proficiency. So already we are at sort of an impasse here. I guess I made my first character sheet wrong this whole time. Or did I? It explicitly says in the old rules about proficiencies that if a background, because you choose your background after you already finished choosing your class and species. It was the last thing that you would do in the character creation. It says if a character would gain the same proficiency from 2 different sources, you can choose a different proficiency of the same kind instead. So clearly what I did here was sleight of hand and deception would have given me somehow the same thing. No, that doesn't make sense. It also says in the old book about customizing a background that you might want to just tweak it so it better fits your character, and you can just customize by replacing one feature with any other. Choose any 2 skills, any 2 total of tool proficiencies or languages from the sample backgrounds. So maybe I just decided to customize it, and I talked to my DM and was like, hey, I feel like persuasion more than deception. Although in hindsight, I should have been proficient in deception. So why don't we just change that right now, you know? Instead, I will assume that we're going to do this correctly, and we're going to be deceptive, and we're also going to get our sleight of hand from those 2 things, which means that we would have had to choose stealth as our other 4th pick. So acrobatics, stealth, investigation, intimidation. Why intimidation? We're a tiny little gnome guy. Are we really that intimidating? Maybe like from a Joker perspective, more so. Very intimidating. Like, you know, this guy's crazy. I don't know what he's gonna do next. Anyway, I can't really remember intimidation coming up very much in the campaign, but if we're going to make some change, fine. I'll choose intimidation over persuasion. Not very persuasive because he's a tricksy little bugger, so he's more likely to try to deceive you or trick you somehow, intimidation-wise, maybe. Now, otherwise, the old charlatan background gave you that favorite scam and the false identity characteristics and all those personality suggestion characteristics, but they also gave you tool proficiency in forgery kits and disguise kits, whereas the new version, it's just forgery kits. So no disguises for you. All of the new backgrounds give you suggestions for which equipment to choose, which is basically just, here's what you should pick for flavor, but also you can just take the gold equivalent value of whatever these things are anyway. So all of the backgrounds add up to the same 50 gold for everybody. No more take a certain background to get a certain amount of gold, like the charlatan gave you a gold pouch with 15 gold in it. It also gave you fine clothes and a disguise kit, and then just tools of the con of your choice. So whatever your sort of favorite scam maybe would be, I think like loaded dice if you're a gambler, cheater, or in my case, I probably picked something disguise kit adjacent. Yes, because I have thieves tools on me and I have a disguise kit on me, but I apparently never ended up having a forgery kit for any such reason, even though I enjoyed the signet of an imaginary duke feature, which was the last thing that the starting equipment gave you, along with a deck of marked cards. The new version just gives you forgery kit, which is useful. You'll have the thing that you're proficient in, and a costume as well as fine clothes. So I guess the costume sort of takes the place of the whole second identity feature sort of idea. Anyway, to the new book's credits, it does say just to hold that thought at this point in the class selection and tells you to move on to determining your origin, which says to start with your background. And so like we were just saying, the charlatan, it gives you all of the things that we discussed, plus now a feat. Every background gives you a feat, and it's always the origin feat. The origin feats are the new not half feats where they give you a +1 to an ability score, which is basically every other kind of feat now does that in the new book. This sort of changes things, how you might have looked at them, like me taking the lucky. Maybe I even would have rolled my stats up a little bit differently than the standard array, but for thinking ahead about what feat I might want to take or what half feat I'll take at level 4, which would give me a +1 to an ability, and maybe I would choose to have an odd numbered ability that I would intend to improve further. Plus, here's the other thing about backgrounds. Besides getting this feat, which in this case, the charlatan background specifically tells you you have to take the skilled feat. Most of them all tell you exactly which feat you need to take. So when I say most, they all tell you which feat to take. But they also tell you which ability scores to improve. So just like before, we were given a +2 intelligence and a +1 dexterity. In this new version, we get to choose to give a +2 and +1 to 2 different abilities, or to give a +1 to 3 different abilities. And out of all of the ability scores that you're allowed to choose from, you have to choose from dexterity, constitution, and charisma for the charlatan. So that means our build here is going to determine things a little bit differently. I couldn't necessarily play the same character if I were to remake it in the new class, to remake it in the new 2024 rule set. Or that might have been the case if it wasn't for the fact that I chose to take a 14 by using a standard array in intelligence, or rather in constitution, and the 12 in intelligence. So if I had chosen to take my +2 to intelligence, or rather if it had been higher than 14, then I might have a problem here. But in this case, we can use the exact same logic for the standard array, but just assign a +2 to constitution and take the 12 from the standard array there and the 14 from the standard array in intelligence. Just swap these two things around and it all still works out just fine for this particular build. But, maybe if I had wanted a done point buy or assigned my 15 in intelligence, because I'm going to be an arcane trickster, I know I'm planning ahead. I'm thinking about what subclass I'm going to make use of, and I want my saving throws on my wizardly arcane trickster spells to be better. Maybe I would have basically just not been able to boost my main stat the way I would have wanted to. So there's a direction in the design. Again, it's like what's going to give you synergy and what's going to fight against your concept. Let me just write down skilled feat, and under equipment, let's just take the suggestions. Forgery kit, costume, fine clothes, 15 gold pieces. And while we're down here, the rogue gives us a choice again between a bunch of stuff that's thematically appropriate or just the gold value, which is the same for everybody, 100 gold. Actually, I just looked, the paladin gets 150 gold, for example. So the gold starting equipment value is not the same for every class. So I'll just write down what they give you: the leather armor, 2 daggers, short sword, short bow, arrows, thieves' tools, burglar's pack. In the old book, we got a choice between burglar's pack or a dungeoneer's pack or an explorer's pack. But like I said, you could have just take back the gold value and then buy whatever you want in the new version. So it doesn't really matter that in the old way they gave you a rapier or a short sword, and we still get the same thieves' tools and leather armor. So let's move on to the next part of the determine origin step, which is choosing a species after the background. We know that we're going with gnome, and like I mentioned, they get 30 feet of movement now before. So gnomes and all of the other small races now get, gnomes and now all of the other small species get 30 feet of movement, whereas before they had 25. And it doesn't give you any ability score increases. That was determined from our background, and I'll just go ahead and fill in all of that. Lovely, this sheet lets you put in the score and gives you the auto output, although when we get to the rogue expertise ability, which lets you double some of your ability scores, the write-in becomes necessary. So some downsides to the auto fill sheet. Maybe there's an update, I don't know. You see on the old sheet, I would just write a little X beside my stat for expertise, so I would know, yeah, expertise, you double the proficiency bonus on that particular skill. But before I get back to the rest of the rogue abilities, yeah, we are gnome. The new gnomes give you, I missed the flavor suggestion in the original gnome traits book about being good-hearted and, I don't know, seemingly whimsically nice as opposed to whimsically an a-hole. But both things give us 60-foot dark vision. We also get gnome cunning, which is almost exactly the same, except instead of it saying saving throws against magic, it just says saving throws now. So simplified, clarified, no longer need to differentiate that it's only advantage for magic saving throws. And we're size small, which it has a place on the new sheet to write, as opposed to before, which didn't have anything such place. And we choose our gnomish lineage. Before they called them sub-races, now you have a sub-race sub-lineage, and we choose forest gnome. Before that, forest gnome, like I said, gave us that +1 to our dexterity, which fit into our rogue build. It gave us the minor illusion cantrip and let us speak with small beasts. Now it's a lot more straightforward. We just always have the Speak with Animals spell prepared and can cast it without a spell slot a number of times equal to our proficiency bonus. You regain that on a long rest, so way more straightforward and nice. You can also spend spell slots, which most of these abilities now clarify that if you have a spell slot available and you know this spell, you have it always prepared, you can use a spell slot for it too. And it's nice that it kind of clarifies giving you that option now as like a standard thing. But the new book doesn't really give you anything in terms of like what the difference besides the mechanics between like a forest or a rock gnome are supposed to be. Flavor wise, like it doesn't really say anything much about them except that they're live in forests and little burrows and they tinker and sort of are clever guys. It doesn't say tinker, but that they made traps and labyrinthine tunnels to confuse their predators. So nothing really to inspire you about their culture, society, or even the like suggested gnomish names to give you some idea of some silly thing to call yourself. I think I got Zivilquicks from just the idea of it'd be funny to have like a nickname that people had trouble pronouncing because I'm so tricksy, mischievous. Maybe it was a little inspired by Mixlix from the Superman series. I can't recall, but I mean, I can see the similarities in that regard at least. Anyway, so we got our ability scores filled out. Same standard array works by giving our +2 to Constitution and our +1 to Dexterity, and our 14 is assigned to Intelligence. No other big differences for our species except for languages. Your species no longer gives you a language. Instead, it just tells you in the chapter about character creation, after choosing a species, to imagine your past. So this is our chance to fill out something like our flaws and our personality traits, where they give you a couple of ideas of what to consider, like who raised you and who was a childhood friend, and did you have a pet, or have you fallen in love, did you join a guild or religion or something like that, and then what element of your past inspires your adventures now. And that's pretty much it. That's all you get. But then it tells you to get to your languages, which was where I was going with that point. Knowledge of certain languages, you get to choose. Everybody just knows common. So right off the bat, we know everybody knows common. Here we are, languages. And then it's up to something in your class to choose whether it gives you a language or not. So in the case of the rogue, that kind of takes us back to some of the rogue features that you get at level 1. It says you get to know Thieves' Cant, which is basically just like rogue speak. I always like to think of it as that scene in Ocean's 12 where they're all kind of around the table and Matt Damon doesn't know what's going on because they're all speaking in code, but they're really just doing it to mess with them. But that's what Thieves' Cant is to me, where you say one thing, but you really mean another, and only those in the know what you really mean.
So, the business?
The business. A doctor who specializes in skin diseases will dream he has fallen asleep in front of the television. Later, he will wake up in front of the television, but not remember his dream.
Would you agree?
So you get this Thieves' Cant, which is what you used to get in the original version, and now it also gives you one other language of your choice. So in my case, the rogue part of me taught me Gnomish, I guess. And I think every class gives everybody somehow, some way, at least one additional language to speak in terms of extra languages. But dang, doesn't it feel weird to be like, yeah, I'm a gnome. And it's like, how did you learn to speak Gnomish? Oh, through my Thieves roguing training. Like, I get the idea that we've decoupled a lot of the choices between your species and your background, because maybe you're an elf, but you weren't raised around elves. So why would you know Elvish just from being an elf, right? That makes sense. But it does feel a little weird that I'm like, oh, I could have chosen a language here, but I think I should maybe have an obvious choice made for me based on me thinking, well, didn't I grow up in a gnomish village? That's my background, but I'm going to get it from my class. So, am I missing something? The next part of the building your character was the determine your ability scores, which is, it's the exact same as it's always been in terms of you got the standard array, or you can roll, or you can use the point cost method. Obviously, in this case, I'm just sticking with a standard array and assigning things back to equal what we used to have. Maybe if I was rebuilding this character, I would choose point buy, which is what I usually do, and I would really math it out to make sure that I didn't have any odd numbers, and that I would boost probably my dexterity and my intelligence up a little bit more to maximize my character here, but I probably would have had to make some sacrifices along the way to do that. Like maybe I would have lower wisdom or something. So for the purposes of this exercise today, in terms of remaking the character, I'll stick with maybe suboptimal choices. You can argue with me in the comments about how you would have built the stats and maybe which feat you might choose instead of lucky here, because we'll get to that pretty soon. This video will turn into, I know this video is going to be pretty long, but thanks for sticking with me. If you're having fun, leave a like and whatever. The next step in the book is actually choose an alignment. I didn't mention this earlier. It's one of the last steps. We chose chaotic neutral, which fits into the whole being a jerk aspect of the character. Every first edgelord is a rogue, chaotic, neutral murder hobo. Am I right? I wasn't a murder hobo. I was just like a sneaky, tricksy, thievy jerk. Barely murdered hardly anyone, though. As I recall it anyway. To the best of my recollection, Your Honor. Right, forgot to fill out background charlatan and our character name. This time we get our prompt for our pronouns, so that's helpful to people who don't think about that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure how y'all feel about neo-pronouns. Don't let me know. I don't want to start an argument about this. I feel like neo-pronouns fit really well into fantasy, especially for creatures like gnomes who are maybe fae them kind of pronoun. Anyway, in the spirit of keeping things as they were, we'll keep Mr. He, Him, Zix. Although, everybody should be free to grow and evolve. Here they do give you some personality ideas though, so if you have a personality that is chaotic, you might be boastful or impulsive or rebellious or self-absorbed. Maybe you're all four of them. And as a neutral person, you might be selfish, disinterested, laconic, or pragmatic. Maybe all four of those things. I hadn't heard laconic before. That just means a person who uses very few words. So sort of like the lack of interest of disinterested, but in a more verbalizing kind of way, perhaps, to take it. The minimal use of words, or being concise and to the point at the point of perhaps seeming rude. So that might be perfect as a neutral suggested alignment. If you're curt, straightforward, to the point, you might, it's kind of leads into the neutral feelings of a robot almost. That could be kind of the style you take that suggestion. So I like that they're giving you personality trait suggestions. They're not leaving you hanging entirely without all of the flavor in your race and your background. They're giving you at least some direction to take something and run with a role play. And then it just goes on to tell you to fill in all your details, everything else you didn't fill in. And luckily this sheet from nathandsome.com was able to fill it out automatically for us. Although we did still need to make a couple more choices to sort of finish things off, specifically to do with filling out the details from our class and the skilled feat that we got. So we briefly touched on the origin feats, but Rogue gets us proficiency in our saving throws, in intelligence and dexterity. Unfortunately, the sheet does not know how to add that number. Oh, we have to write a proficiency bonus. Duh! So at level 5, we would have a +3 proficiency bonus. That's all the same as it was in terms of progression. and our initiative +3 because we have +3 dexterity and we have no other thing that's influencing that, and our passive perception at 10 because our wisdom is just flat 10, no modifiers. Our leather armor gives us the same armor class, which is 11 plus our dexterity modifier. And like I was saying, the skilled origin feat. What is the origin feat? It's basically a feat that you can take at level 1, level 0 basically, right off the bat, and it's assigned to you by your background. So in the case of our charlatan, we were assigned skilled, which just gives us proficiency in any combination of 3 skills or tools of your choice. So we already have a bunch of skills that we're proficient in, but now we get to choose a couple more just for free. So this is where things are really starting to diverge, and finally we're seeing some bigger changes. Apart from the ability score shenanigans I mentioned earlier, these are starting to show off some of the big changes between these two characters. We're gonna have way more skills to choose from in this case. So we dropped persuasion before. Why don't we just pick up persuasion again and take that back up? And while we're at it, why don't we boost our perception? Perception seems like a good thing. We could have 13 passive perception. Perception's a great skill to have. And one more, well, we chose to have something else we're missing, which kind of is, again, this is making up for it by giving us this feat. We're making up for what we could have had before, which was proficiency in the disguise kit tool, which was originally in the charlatan background. Now it only gave you forgery kit. Here we go. We have another chance because it gave us the skill to pick up the tool that we were missing, and we get to make the same choice, just in our own way. So there you go. Look at that. And that brings us back to the rest of our rogue level 1 features, which include getting the skill, which include expertise. So like I said, I like to usually just mark a little X and show which has expertise, and in this case, we're just going to have to write down which 2 skills to choose for our expertise. I chose Sleight of Hand and Thieves' Tools. However, would I make the same choice on this character given the new rules? Well, tool proficiency and skills, they're pretty similar to how they used to be, but now it says for tool proficiency, if you have tool proficiency with a tool, you add your proficiency bonus to any ability check you make that uses that tool. So just like before, we would have just used our proficiency bonus. Now it also says if you have proficiency in a skill that's used with that check, you have advantage on the check too. So in the case of Thieves' Tools, the ability is dexterity, and obviously we have dexterity abilities that would apply. I think this is vaguely leaving it up to you to kind of figure it out, but like if you have a dexterity ability like, I don't know, Sleight of Hand, you might have the advantage on your Thieves' Tools tool check, which would again still just use your proficiency bonus, I guess, plus your dexterity. So dexterity plus proficiency equals the same thing as taking Sleight of Hand expertise. But Sleight of Hand expertise doesn't mean just using Thieves' Tools. I feel like a lot of people were never really sure what to use. Like, oh, you should have Sleight of Hand bonus on top of your Thieves' Tools proficiency check or something like that. It's very clear now that, well, not very clear. It's impliedly clear that you should get advantage if you have proficiency in Sleight of Hand. So having expertise in it doesn't really do anything other than the fact that I think this character is also maybe going to pickpocket people or hide things and do other stuff. So having expertise in both still makes sense, and I'm still happy with that choice. But we do get to at least have the clarity now that we probably get advantage on all of our Thieves' Tools checks. So we would have +6 and advantage. We already went over Thieves' Cant. We got Sneak Attack, of course, and it's got a nice little sneak attack scaling chart in the new book, just like in the old one, and looks like the exact same progression, so no worries. Once we reach level 5, it would be 3d6. And the only other new thing that you get in the new book that we didn't have before was the weapon mastery system. And we get to choose 2 as a rogue and change things on a long rest. So I think we're going to choose rapiers. Or will we? Before I used a rapier, but does that still seem like the most optimal choice when we have light property, scimitar, and short sword? Seems pretty good to me. Maybe even better than the rapier alone. Because even though we don't get to do the extra damage modifier, or +3, we do get to attack twice with the d6, which is better than just 1d8. So, plus that means if we miss with our sneak attack on the first hit, we always have this chance to apply it by getting our second hit. But what are the odds we're going to miss if we have the Vex Mastery on our short sword, which we attack with second after our scimitar? So we always have advantage on our scimitar attack when we go to make our follow-up attack in the next round. Probably hit, probably get our sneak attack on. Then we just follow up with the short sword and hope we hit again with that, so that it makes sure that we have advantage on our next attack. So I'm sorry, old sheet, but it just feels like this makes way more sense now. This is one change where the optimizer in me just wins. Then again, let me play devil's advocate for a second. We also had a light crossbow, which we would probably use as frequently as possible because it does the same damage as the rapier, plus it's at range, and we are kind of a little coward who probably hides in the back and then pops out from hidden using our bonus action. We didn't even get to level 2 yet. Well, this is how far we are in the video. Level 2, we get cunning action, which lets us hide as a bonus action. And while leaving our bonus action free, even with 2-weapon fighting, thanks to the scimitar property, doesn't mean that maybe we would rather take light crossbow as our weapon mastery. And that would give us the slow mastery. So if we hit them with slow, their speed is reduced by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. So being a rogue, you can use your bonus action to dash too. So you can always make sure that you're getting away from your opponent so that, if they're a melee person and you're shooting them with your crossbow and slowing them down so they can never catch up to you, it's not really as much of a problem as it would have been when I had 25 feet of movement even. So choices? Rapiers also have the Vex property, so that's the idea that it will give you advantage and basically guarantee your sneak attack for the next attack. So, alright, I've changed my mind. Let's go back. Rapier, light crossbow, keep it the same. Now you see how it all pans out. We just get these extra features and kind of helps us make sure that we're getting the most out of our attacks. So that's Rogue level 1. Level 2, we got Cunning Action, like I said already. And level 3, we got our Rogue subclass, which, like I said, we're going to take the Arcane Trickster. The other thing we also get now at level 3 is the Steady Aim feature, which was introduced in Tasha's, I believe. No longer an optional option, it is built in, which just lets you give yourself advantage by not spending your movement. But here's what we're really here for, the Arcane Trickster. The spellcasting progression chart is almost exactly the same, except the new one doesn't tell you how many cantrips you know. Now it's the same in both books, you get 3 and then a 4th one at level 10, but instead of showing you in the chart the cantrip known progression, it just tells you in the descriptive text. Whatever. It still tells you, let's not forget Minor Illusion, but the Arcane Trickster subclass, it still tells you that you know 3 cantrips and that one of them has got to be Mage Hand, because it gives you some special Mage Hand abilities, Mage Hand Legerdemain, which just lets you use Mage Hand as a bonus action, and you can also make it invisible, pretty much just like it always was. It lets you control it as a bonus action. Normally it's an action and a whole thing. And 2 other cantrips of our choice. In that case, from the wizard spell list, I chose Message and Prestidigitation. Before, you would have to flip to the back of the book to look for the wizard spell list. Now, I actually just have to flip to the wizard class to look at their spell list. And would I take anything different today? Well, Prestidigitation, say that 3 times fast, I dare you. Prestidigitation is basically about flavor. It's a flavor cantrip. But we've got a couple new juicy options in the new book here, like the new True Strike. I can't believe I'm saying this, but in the new version, True Strike with the rapier actually helps us keep up damage-wise, as opposed to just stabbing with the rapier normally versus the 2-weapon fighting debate I had a few minutes ago. Just a little bit, and it's a lot cooler. So I think the optimizer in me is actually going to win out on this case, and we're going to take True Strike instead of Prestidigitation. 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 You have to believe me, I said it without cuts. Prestidigitate. I lost it. The new book here recommends Minor Illusion and Mind Sliver. We already got Minor Illusion because we're a gnome. That's still a thing. Specifically Forest Gnome, because we picked that. We got Minor Illusion and Speak with Animals. So I might as well write down our first level spell here. Speak with Animals. The new book also lets us change out our cantrips every time we level up. Intelligence is our ability modifier. Save DC 13 and attack bonus +5 at level 5. That's still all true. We have only 3 level 1 spell slots available to us, which is still true. And this time we get to choose 3 spells at level 1, but then soon we get a 4th spell. So that was our Find Familiar, Charm Person, Sleep, and Silent Image. In this case, we don't have to choose from Illusion and Enchantment outside of the one other spell that we would get to choose from the wizard list. So I think Find Familiar is still a good pick, even though, because we can choose any spell from the wizard list. That was the one that we chose when we had the opportunity in the first place. It makes sense. It's still good. The new Charm Person spell, it's pretty similar to how it was, although the way Friends and Charm Person works now, Charm Person just feels like a longer lasting version of the Friends cantrip. And I mean, personally, I'm a little biased towards just using the cantrip for whatever you need. They're going to realize they were charmed for you much faster, so it depends on how long your mission is required for, whether it's worth the spell slot. Anyway, I'll just say, I think for the thematic purposes of what it should be used for, it's pretty much the same, so we'll keep the character consistent. Sleep and Silent Image, both similarly as useful as they were. Sleep might even have gotten a little better, I think, but this isn't the nitty-gritty mechanics video necessarily about every little spell and all the differences of every spell. This is just, it's more about the broad strokes of where the character lands and how similar can you make it between the two editions, just sort of seeing what happens there. Now, just about the appearance box, I mean, we used to have like these like things to describe them. Now you can just sort of write it in, I guess. There, my dating profile is complete. So that's level 3. At level 4, before I chose the Lucky Feat, which gave you basically 3 rerolls. And it was very good. Now it's actually an Origin Feat, which I could have taken at level 1 if I had chosen the particular background that assigned it to me. Or if I was a human, humans get like a choice now. That's what their like racial power, instead of a free feat for variant human. You know, it's like, it kind of makes sense, at least in terms of the continuation of the rules into this new version. And the new Lucky Feat, it's not 3 uses, it's proficiency bonus uses, which at level 5, which we are at the moment in this build, is a +3 anyway, so you really only lose out during your early levels. But now what all it really does is let you give yourself advantage, or you can impose disadvantage against you. But basically, the way it's worded makes it different in that you have to kind of announce that you want to use it before you see the roll. Whereas before, people, I feel like it was like, oh, I rolled really badly, I want to use the luck to re-roll that. Is it still what I would pick today? Well, given the fact that I didn't really optimize my scores for a nice juicy +1 anywhere except my charisma, which, you know, we use intelligence as our spellcasting modifier, I guess I am a swarmy little dingus, and having a slightly better charisma would help. So what about our half option feats options? Actor makes sense because it gives you charisma, but I lost the whole forging a second identity feature from the old background. Now it doesn't have anything like that. So am I pretending I'm a new person all the time? This would have to be me re-injecting that flavor in that direction. And this is the thing, you know, why am I considering these other options? Because, you know, something about origin feats and picking up an origin feat at a later level instead of doing something that seems like it should be better because it's only unlockable at level 4 means I just like, it kind of feels bad, I guess, to like look back and be like, oh, it's just an origin feat, you know, what about one of these +1 feats? Maybe this is like way cooler for me. If we wanted to slightly boost our intelligence and then plan our level 8 feat to be another +1 to intelligence, we could pick up something like Keen Mind is now different and gives this half feat. It gets rid of a bunch of the flavor of it before. Now it's just lets you use the new study action. There's study and search instead of, I don't know, just roll perception, I guess. I think that's probably what you do for those anyway, but never mind. But the new book's got telepathic and telekinetic. I'm not sure if that's where we're coming from. Telekinetic is basically like gives you Mage Hand again, too. So it doesn't seem very optimal for the fact that Arcane Trickster already gave me Mage Hand. So what the heck? We're still lucky. And at level 5, we get Uncanny Dodge, which is basically the exact same as it was before. But also, we get an additional feature now called Cunning Strike. And basically what that does for you is it lets you spend on one of your, at least for now, one of your sneak attack dies at the cost of reducing that die's worth of damage in order to apply an additional effect. So you can poison the target if they fail a constitution save, you can trip them so they're prone, or you can withdraw, which lets you move half your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. It's kind of like a mini disengage for free. As part of the attack, you just sacrifice some of your damage for it. So an additional cool option to do. And now we have finally reached our original character at level 5, and we get to match them up and sort of see, okay, so what's different? What did we get? What did we lose? Where did we end up in terms of this whole thing? So, well, hit points are calculated the same. They're just in a different place in the book, which is a little irksome that they're in like the gaining a level, like character creation section, as opposed to with the classes that tells you their hit die. But I digress. Overall, we're pretty close. We're really not that different than we used to be. I don't really feel like we lost anything except for some of this like flavor description kind of like personality. We did lose the option to have optimized our intelligence a little bit more strongly in terms of picking specifically the Arcane Trickster rogue, but we never did that on our original sheet anyway either, so it was a wash in our case. Otherwise, basically just because some mechanics in the background changed, like the lucky feat being different, like the spells being updated, and just clarifying the speak with small beasts just gives you speak with animals. That kind of just, it seems like that's really what it should have always been. I consider that like maybe a fix. We mostly ended up in the exact same place as we were before. We just lost some of the extra flavor from the backgrounds. The backgrounds are much more simplified, and instead of your species directing which sort of playstyle class combo fits in terms of your build, now your background really dictates that. So we ended up with more skills than we used to have by a couple, 3 I think at least. And we also got the Cunning Strike additional options and the Weapon Mastery boons as well on our attacks. And otherwise, we're pretty much the same as we were before. So I'd be very happy to be switching over to play this new version of the character given the 2024 rules, because it seems like I mostly just gain new options and win. Couple of grinding gear friction points that maybe if I was rebuilding this today and I wanted to play specifically this combination of background and class, I might actually be a little bit more like, maybe I don't want to be a charlatan after all. We'll have to actually see. I'm not sure what the new custom background rules are, but I kind of feel like personally it's just like, yeah, if it doesn't make sense for what you have in mind, like just make up your own. The old book just said make up your own, so this one kind of just says stuff about using older backgrounds and species and like how to just use the new rules with them. It doesn't really clarify like how to assign ability scores to your old background that doesn't exist in the new book. Like this case, we were restricted dexterity, constitution, charisma with charlatan. If you use an old background, it's like just pick, I guess. So until further notice for these supposed rules, everybody just pick old backgrounds and assign whatever you want for your build so that you don't have to be restricted. Because in Tasha's, they kind of like did away with like assigning which ability scores you had to choose with your species. They just were like, you know what, if you want to just do it this way, it's probably fine. And then they reintroduced some restrictions in this, which again, like I kind of showed earlier, it can direct the flow of your thought patterns in terms of like what's optimal to build, or where does this push me in terms of my build. If I want to be a charlatan, but I also want to be an arcane trickster, that doesn't really work as well necessarily because of the restrictions that they want to impose on you in the new version. Whereas in the old version, it flowed very naturally for me to choose Forest Gnome as my species, and that's been decoupled from the choice now. So now it's really, the friction point has been moved from your race and class and ability scores to really more your background, which just took the place of the species. So it's a lot more similar than it might seem. It's just new and different. But I think we've successfully changed over a 2024 from a 2014 version of a character, a rogue arcane trickster, from one to the other. Here's what it looks like. Hope you enjoyed the journey. And I just want to make something very clear. When Zix betrayed the party, when I stopped playing him, I did discuss it with the DM ahead of time. I'm not a terrible player, even though this character is like the quintessential possible problem player thing. I will say, you learn how to play together as a team pretty quickly when you try to play an edgelord. You got to know that, even if the other PCs don't know that you're pickpocketing some guy, the players around the table still see you, stashing that treasure in your greedy little hands. It's not, you want to play with people, not just do the, it's what my character would do moment all of the time, right? So anyway, just to be clear, I talked to the DM. I'm like, I want to play a new character. This guy's kind of an a-hole, and I really like roleplay. I do like what my character would do moments, but I could see that this may be for a different kind of party, and it might be better to switch things up and play a new character. So if you want to see what my new character was and me do this again with a champion fighter and see how much better that got. I know, champion, right? I played it. I played it in the old version because he was a jock. He was an elf jock. And if you want to see that video, let me know. If this was fun or whatever, you liked it, let me know. Thank you very much for getting this far in the video. I know this must have been quite the journey, but I hope you enjoyed it. And I thought it was a fun idea to try doing. It was fun going back, looking like at this 10-year-old character and being like, oh my God, all of the things that I've learned from then on and played so many different games. And yeah, tell me about your D&D journey and where you started and where you're looking ahead now. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you had fun. Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you maybe in another video like this, or we'll get back to some of the other random gaming stuff I'm doing. CK3, you like CK3? Game of Thrones? Did a bit of that. We got Baldur's Gate 3, which is basically D&D. We can do some of that too. We'll get back into it. Thanks for watching.